Hi, this is Richard Grieco for runningonce.com, and this is going to be part 6 of my review of a run I made a while back now in the 10k PLO event that occurred during Scoop 2019. Based on the current big blind, I'd assume we're approaching the end of the re-entry period, which can lead to some interesting dynamics. You often find that some of the likely more better rolled and certainly more gambly people who are playing the tournament and end up in this situation with a shorter stack are in the mood to gamble it up, increase short-term variance, either run up a stack or bust and re-enter. I definitely understand the temptation, even in the 10k, but in general terms, unless other specific circumstances exist, like, for example, if I was at the toughest table in the entire tournament, or what I perceived as the toughest table, in a scenario where I knew that we weren't breaking anytime soon, then it might be more than otherwise in my interest to take whatever close spots I could to either run up a stack and then pose more of a threat to the other players, or bust out and re-enter and hopefully end up with a more fortunate seat draw next time around. Obviously, that's not to the extent where you start like wildly punting it off with any 4 cards in any scenario, but certainly would take pretty close spots that I might otherwise potentially look to pass up. But unless you are in that situation, I think it's better to restrain yourself and play fundamentally solid strategy. Like, it might look like this is going well for me, and obviously it is in terms of long-term dollar EV. But in terms of short-term chip EV, all the other stacks at this table are actually doing reasonably well against me. I can't play that aggressively. Like, it's not like this is the bubble or anything, and I can just apply a ton of pressure and absolutely pile it on against everyone. If I do open too wide, or even if I open a standard range, I'm going to get 3 better bunches because that's meant to happen for chip EV, and these players are going to be playing more or less a chip EV strategy. Also, if someone runs their stack up a little bit, then one of the guys who still has kind of one of the stacks in the 20-30 big blind range can easily get into spots where they can over-realize post-flop equity because it's like a 3-way pot. They have 100k, me and some other guy are 300k effective. And structurally, those spots usually work out super well for the shortest stack. As a lot of you will already know from first-hand experience, both in cash games and MTTs. So it's worth your while to kind of cling on a little bit and potentially get to a point where you can find yourself in a highly profitable situation a little while down the line, on the basis that it's more effective to show something happening than talk about it. I'm going to quickly show an example sim I ran a while ago, which demonstrates this idea in action. So on the left-hand side, we have a baseline sim where everyone's 40 big blinds deep. There's no rake because it's a tournament. And these are the EVs. So the EVs are all going to sum to 0. And what they are is largely irrelevant. The key is how they compare over on the right-hand side, where now the small blind has 20 big blinds. So, like, I ran this where all of the 4 players in turn had a shallower stack, but I didn't want to kind of take too much time talking about it. Suffice to say that in each and every instance, the person whose stack I shorten has more EV than they do in the baseline sim. So if you see here, the button's EV is a little bit lower. The big blind's EV is a little bit lower. The cutoff's EV is slightly lower. And all of them give up some amount of value to the player in small blind who's suddenly winning 3 big blinds more, or losing 3 big blinds less, depending on perspective. And that's, for a variety of reasons, like both players, if memory serves, cutoff and button, are opening a little bit tighter because they think correctly that small blind's going to be 3-betting more. So small blind gets to open uncontested, or gets to play heads-up pots against the big blind at a higher frequency. Obviously, sometimes gets to 3-bet. Obviously, sometimes gets to squeeze. And the situation generally just works out super well for them. So that's what could be in store, basically, for any one of these guys, 10 minutes down the line. So, yeah, that's, like, obviously, it's, in this circumstance, I'm reasonably sure that no one's going to be wildly punting. But if you find yourself in a tournament where you happen to have a shortish stack and the end of the re-entry period is fast approaching, I definitely understand the temptation to think, well, I'm going to see if I can run this up. Because obviously, like having a big stack is powerful in PLO tournaments, especially as you approach potentially the bubble phase, or just bust out and try again. And the thing that you always have to consider is that this stack is worth more, or the stack that you have in front of you, even if it's short in kind of terms of big blinds, can be worth quite a lot to you in terms of kind of short to mid-term expected big blinds 100 win rate. So, actually going to dive into the action now. We open, which is, I don't spend too long about it. This is just a fold pre-flop. It's fine at 100 big blinds, but like literally the last 5 minutes will explain why I have to be a little bit more restrained. In the current circumstance, everyone's just playing chip EV, which involves aggressive 3-betting. Pretty standard check back on flop. Very easy to have a better c-bet candidate. And mostly we don't bet. No hoper hands on pretty dynamic boards. Turn I like bluffing, which we go ahead and do. Paired boards, we're slightly more inclined to choose bluffs linearly, because we're a little less inclined to bluff our worst board pairs. Like if the turn here were the 7 of diamonds, I'd be bluffing quite a lot of my 5x plus gut shot kind of thing. Whereas here, I mean, we're still betting some of our worst 5x most likely. But a lot like ace king 5, for example, has reasonable EV to just check back. So we're being a little less aggressive with those combinations as a result. Need to find our bluffs from somewhere. Obviously, we can delay c-bet some turn interaction like straight draws, sort of flush draws rather. Or straight draws. But I'm fine sprinkling in some of the hands lowest in our range because we're not going to have that many of them. I mean, we're not meant to have this hand anyway, but like since we do, the best way to play it is to mostly bet. It can also turn into a pretty decent 2-barrel on a bunch of runouts because we unblock every draw, and so the fact that we have no equity on, or basically no equity on the turn, can become a plus point on river when we unblock, like the queens, jacks, eights, clubs kind of thing. And this is a good river to follow through. We can bluff some stuff with good blockers to the top of his range, but those combinations also suffer from worse removal because they tend to block his straight draws. Like if we decide, okay, we want to block his best pairs, so we're going to bluff Broadway cards. So I have king, queen, jack. Fantastic. I block a lot of his Broadway cards. I also block a lot of his busted draws, which are obviously folding. So since we have 0 EV in the check line, bluff seems pretty good. We went with 2/3 pot, and this is fine, but I actually prefer going larger. We have a pretty big polarity advantage here when we get to the river this way. We don't have very many of these combinations either, which unblock every missed draw and have literally 0 EV in the check line. So I think we get to go pretty crazy with them. Like we're not going to have 7 high, 8 high very often at all. So when we do have it, it's kind of go nuts. But we get looked up by jacks. Seems reasonable. The Comey flats small blind. Check back flop, no backdoor flush draw, relatively high EV in the check line. Yeah, like this is a board you have to be pretty cautious on when you're facing small blind cold call. Same thing on turn, like we have showdown value, we don't retain equity against his continues that well, we can still get check raised, which is kind of nasty. Lakomi's pretty aggressive too, so it's not like I can use the logic that I just bet for a free showdown against like a super predictable opponent. You can use that logic if you are against a super predictable opponent, but Lakomi doesn't fit that description, and most other players who are in this event don't either. River, I think, is close. It's a clear value bet against the big blind, who is defending, especially since it's a tournament, a lot wider. And I have the best. I think, like, if I had, ace 8 7 5, I just check back. I'm pretty sure about that, actually. I could be meant to bet my my ace queen, and then maybe just bet my ace queen and check back every other ace. Because I'm going to be picking a relatively small sizing here, I would imagine, like half pot or so. I can still have ace jack and stuff that went for the double delay. Have some 9x, so I'm not. I'm capped in the sense that I don't have, aces full very often, but I'm not capped in the sense that I just never have anything good in my distribution, so that if I bet, I'm just repping kind of nothing. So yeah, I kind of like betting small. By small, I guess I mean like half pot. We check back and lose to slightly worse ace. So yeah, I think a little bit missed value there. It's possible, like, I know that I have Lakomi tagged as my unpredictable reg with my unpredictable reg color, and I tend to play a little bit more cautiously against people I have that opinion of. Pretty easy call with a double suited hand, relatively connected, short stack, so on and so forth, or short effective stack. And we just go with shove on flop. I kind of like this. We're getting it in. The SPR is small. I can deny equity to basically anything I make fold because I have jack high. Yeah, this seems reasonable. At equilibrium, I probably don't get, the SPR is 1.5, so I get some amount of bets, but at equilibrium, someone would definitely be conscious that my range is not doing great on this board in terms of equity, but that ceases to matter as much once the SPR gets as low as this. And also, he opened full pot, so my range is tighter than it might otherwise be. Fold. Just opening into 10 big blinds and shoving flop and winning. Raise and take the blinds. Raise, get called. This is a super dry board, but I still need some kind of equity. So I think give up is reasonable. Checks through. I think just keep checking. If I had the nut flush draw, I'd be slightly more interested in betting. The thing is, though, I block a lot of both players' air regions with the other Broadway cards that I have, or the King Jack 9 combination specifically, I would imagine Hecklin has quite a bit of when he has no pair. So I'm going to be up against, I think someone has Queen X plus, reasonably often here. And I'm not making Queen X fold, and I don't have a great hand to two barrels, so yeah, I just keep checking. But we go with a little bit of a lazy bet. Yeah, I mean, in position, Hecklin's pretty good very good and pretty tricky. And he can definitely check back the top of his range on this board because it's not like the top of his range needs much protection on Queen 7 deuce rainbow. So this is a little bit lazy. It's kind of like the old, if in doubt, bet third pot kind of thing. Which is, has some amount of truth to it, but it is very risky to apply in, as the ability of your opponents increases, basically. I think I have the best hand quite a bit. I do unblock his bluffs, and Hecklin definitely isn't, scared of, scared isn't even the right word, he's fine with hero calling, basically. So, he doesn't need a flush to call, or anything like that. And I don't think I get bluffed particularly often. I don't particularly block his bluffs except the 6 in my hand, I guess. I feel like I mostly want to bet. Basically, trying to decide what I want my betting strategy to be, and from that get a better idea as to whether I want this hand in it. So I think I want reasonably, I think I want one half pot sizing, basically, or around, one medium sizing. Because I don't think Hecklin's exactly uncapped. He does shove a lot of his flop slow plays when I bet into him on this turn. And it's reasonably dynamic, as far as dynamic as, a board that starts out Queen 7 deuce rainbow can be. Yeah, I think half pot, if I don't want to bet a size, basically, I think what I'm trying to say is I don't want to bet a size where he gets to basically only call flushes. I think if I go too large, or if I have a sizing that includes going too large, that's what I end up doing. I also I'm not convinced that I want large bets, because I don't think I have many hands in my range that would want to go in that range. As in, I don't think I have many hands in my distribution that want to go in a large betting range. So unblocking all the pairs is decent. Certainly unblocking the queen is good. I'd be checking this hand for sure if it had a queen. I'd maybe actually slightly like to have a 7 or a 4 in my hand. I don't think it matters all that much, though. Yeah, I think I like going... I need to check the king high flush at some frequency, but I think I mostly want to bet half pot with it. And then force him to call some combinations of queen X with a club. That seems reasonable. I mean, the SPR is such that, it's not like I have to worry about getting shoved on by a range that can then apply a bunch of leverage, basically. It's a reasonable open. Were Hecklin any shorter, I'd want to size up to full pot and tighten my range. Just because there's a thing where, if the big blind has sub 15 big blinds or so, then if you open to your air quotes standard, well, first of all, when the effective stack size is below 20 big blinds, pot is usually just the highest EV open. But more specifically, the reason that is if I open, let's say, min, and Hecklin has my stack size, then I still have the ability to overrealize my equity post-flop, and so he has to account for that when he's deciding how wide to call pre-flop. If he has 10 big blinds, then he's going to do a very good job of realizing basically all of his equity post-flop. Certainly he's going to realize it at a higher rate, because I have less ability to over-realize using positional advantage and betting leverage. And so, in order to generate as many folds as I can pre-flop, I need to size up, is the idea. I'd probably still be okay with doing that here, to be honest. Especially Kostya's usually not crazily aggressive. I can live with either here. I don't love getting 3x pot in with bottom pair and some half-tainted straight draw outs. And I don't think I can bet fold bottom pair and a double gutter. I think he might be potting some of the middle of his range, and then his checking range becomes a little bit more polar. And against that strategy, I would say checking back my hand starts to do better. Because I still have to get it in, but I start to get it in against fewer semi-bluffs, basically. But we go with... I mean, you do tend to see a lot of in-position betting around about SPR 3, because you can pick a small size, and the out-of-position player can't bluff raise you. He doesn't have enough room to maneuver to bluff raise you. But I think that argues for betting different types of hands, basically. And not so much betting this particular combination. No interaction with the turn. Some ability to bluff rivers, maybe. Definitely some EV in the check line. Don't think I make him fold very much. And I think also here he might be leading some of the middle of his range. That check back seems reasonable. And river, he goes with block. And I have a pretty average bluff catcher. I think calling quite a bit of showdown value is a good idea, given how polar I'd expect his check call range to be on the flop. if I think he's leading merged, I also think he's check raising quite merged. And so when he check calls, he starts to have like hands he's okay slow playing, which are few and far between at such a low SPR, and then hands that he's okay peeling for a cheap price, but isn't that excited about getting in. So I block a lot of straight draws. But I do end up calling because obviously I've gone ahead and beat a bluff. I mean, in a way, I don't know if I had some kind of in-game information. In a way, what I'm doing by calling this hand is just saying I'm calling all my bluff catchers. And then I just have to hope that he's bluffing enough that a strategy of calling all my bluff catchers doesn't perform poorly. But then a strategy of calling all my bluff catchers, if I perceive his range on the flop to be quite polar, doesn't perform that badly when he has far more potential bluffs than value combinations, and I'm getting 4-1. Raise and take lines. This seems wide. I certainly wouldn't open, like, if Bollum were on button, I certainly wouldn't open this hand. I think I have a perception, or had a perception, that Kostya was not a bad player, but like an inline player. And it's possible that we've also now reached the end of re-entry. In which case the open probably becomes a little bit better again. Like, if I have ace 10, 5-4, I'm fine with it. So it's at least close. And to be fair, you always have to bear in mind, if I were to look in an equilibrium sim and it would ask it, should I be opening this hand? If it were to say no, which I have a feeling it might do, it would be assuming that everyone will play an equilibrium response strategy, which involves a lot of aggressive 3-betting. So if I think I'm getting under 3-bet, especially by the in-position player, then I get to expand my opening range. So if ace 10, 5-4 is probably fine anyway, then ace 9, 5-4 can't be that bad. I mean, it is a big factor. The difference between ace 9 and ace 10 is considerable, but yeah, what are you going to do? And the flop here is kind of interesting, so I'm going to go through what I was thinking, or what I assume I was thinking at the time, and then run through a couple of things in the solver. So I end up checking flop back. What I was thinking was that the range asymmetry is pretty huge here, because I've opened cutoff, and he's defended versus 2.3 odd X. So I should have the top, even if I'm opening too wide, maybe I have top 35% of hands, and he has let's say 65% of hands that aren't in the top 10. So his 10th to 75th percentile. But I still don't think I get to bet all of the time on this flop. You can play a strategy of betting small with range, and it would probably not lose that much EV. It would lose some, I suspect. And betting small with range is definitely a better option than building a poorly balanced checking range that's just full of very natural fits for that range, and so it's just queens and jacks and the king high flush draw maybe. You need to have elements of both regions, or elements of a lot of regions in your checking range. Otherwise, it kind of just becomes better to simplify. But in any event, given that I think I want a reasonable amount of checks here, I was thinking that you typically play a little bit more passively when you block the flush draw in situations like this. And I probably also want to play linearly with my ace-x region, i.e. bet the ace-king, ace-queen more often than the ace-9, ace-8. So with that, we're going to dive into a couple of solver sims. So here we have SPR 9, in position ranges cutoff RFI, and the out of position range is a big blind defense range versus button to try and create like an asymmetry that I thought represented that which I believe to exist. We still don't get to bet anywhere close to all of our range. And if we have our ace-x hand class, then we do a lot more betting when we have the higher cards. So king, queen, jack, for example, is doing a lot of betting. And then if we have like 8, 7, 6, a little bit less, although obviously still fine to bet at some frequency. What's interesting is how spades impact us when we have different types of hands. So, for example, let's say we have ace king, ace queen, our ace king, ace queen region basically. So we're betting this region 79% of the time. If I say we have 2 spades, that goes down somewhat to 68%. So having spades is a negative effect on our betting frequency when we have ace king, ace queen, basically. Now if I say we have like an ace, a weak ace basically, so an ace without better than ace 10. So now we're looking at a weaker region. Now we're betting 59% of the time, and if I say we have spades, now the betting frequency goes up. So so spades have a positive effect when we have weaker ace-x. So basically what I think that's telling us is that our bad ace-x wants to have spades, because if we run into better ace-x, which is the hand class that's going to put in the most money against us, then we have more equity. If we run into ace king queen jack and we have ace 9 5 4, then we quite want spades because we have more equity. If we already have ace king, then the hand class we're going to get in the most money against is usually weaker ace-x, or the hand class we're going to encounter at the highest frequency where money goes in, put another way, is weaker ace-x. And so we don't want spades because we need to then make it so that our opponent can have a few weaker continues than ace-x, and those are obviously going to be like reasonably high pocket pairs and then flush draws. So actually our hand mostly bets, but we go ahead and check. I bet so that equal, like, it's not a huge difference, and there's a lot of mixing as you would expect on an early street with a high SPR. The turn is rather good for us, and our opponent probes, which is also far from unwelcome. Now, if we look at the solver, this hand is pretty easy to play from our perspective. Out of position probes, and we just don't have a raising range, basically. Although if we have specifically a straight flush, there's a little like tiny trace of raise. So we raise essentially never. We can simplify it to never, and therefore our decision with our combination becomes pretty easy. Obviously, we're not meant to have our combination much because we should have c-bet it on flop a lot of the time. But like, no matter what we have, we're pure calling basically. Presumably because mostly our range becomes a little bit less polar when we don't bet flop, and therefore, if we split it on turn, especially on this kind of board, then we potentially expose our calling range to more river aggression than we would like. I think there's a reasonable case to be made for going against that and raising. I don't think this, like... So, if I check back flop and raise turn, it doesn't look like a line that's typically that bluff heavy. But I still don't think my opponent's going to react to that by folding much ace-x, if any. Because on this board, his fear won't be that I've got a straight flush, because that's one combination. It would be that I've got, like, ace-3, which is, more than one combination. And so I think if he has, like, ace, king, jack 10 or whatever, with, assuming that hand probes turn more than never, I don't think he's folding any ace-x that he has, basically, because he can't help but have overcards when the other two cards on board are a 3 and a deuce. And the main thing is that I don't think the out of position player here has very many bluffs. Like, if we go into the solver again, and okay, so we're probing 25% of the time. This range is like 3/4 of that. So if I say we have worse than an ace, that's half our range, and we're betting it 20% of the time. So 20% of 20% of half is like roughly 10% of our total distribution. That means that going on for half of our betting range on turn as out of position here is worse than an ace. And you can see over here some of the bluffs that we have with like a spade and some irrelevant cards, or a low pocket pair and a gut shot, or just randomness all over the place. And I'm not convinced this reflects reality. I think out of position is quite value heavy. Because, again, layering assumption on assumption, I think the likely perception out of position has is that my range when I check back flop is stronger, a lot stronger, than my range when I check back most other flops. So I don't think he's bluffing very often at all, which then means he has a bunch of value combinations. If he has a flush, then there are a lot of times I think when he just goes for one street, and I struggle to get very much money in against just a flush. So I think my best chance to get a lot of money is by raising turn. I certainly run the risk of exposing my raising range, and it is kind of brutal that I have an ace in my hand. If I just had a straight flush, then I would for sure argue for ignoring the solver and raising. But even with an ace, I don't think if he's bluffing now, he continues to bluff. And I think I might get one turn call, which then automatically free rolls me for the river. Because just if I call, just the pot is 60k, and no way it gets much larger than that the vast majority of the time. Unless my opponent, that's the other thing. Well, my opponent can just have specifically ace 3, which from his perception is the nuts. So I think there's a reasonable case to be made for raising here. It will I don't even think you can argue that it leads to issues in that it exposes your calling range, because I'm saying I think we should raise specifically the straight flush. I'm not saying we should raise specifically a bunch of ace 3. I think we should consider it for similar reasons, but I think it applies most of all when we have a straight flush. Because we need to make the pot we need to make the pot large so that if he does have an overcard and hit it, it's easier for him to go broke, basically. I don't think he'll necessarily struggle to find ways to go broke anyway, but he has to do some amount more heavy lifting has to be done if the river SPR is over 4 compared if I raise turn and get it a fair amount lower. Anyway, we do go with call. River kind of a bad card. Kind of crushing this board considerably too hard. But our opponent does go with big bet, which I would take to mean he has a whole bunch of value combinations. So I think some lower aces up, aces full, can get bet folded here. Ace 5 is obviously just getting the money in basically no matter what I do. So again, it's very exploitable logic, but I think I just want to raise to a size where some ace 3, ace deuce might shrug and call. Going full pot doesn't strike me as helpful, because if he has a hand that's stacking off, he'll just stack off against any size raise, as in he'll 3-bet. So I think I need to be targeting his non-nutted full houses, which is basically what I go for. I could live with going a little bit smaller, but whatever. And he bet folds. So he could have had the nut flush with a couple of pair blockers or something like that, or the nut flush with an ace. Who knows? Could have had just ace 3, ace 2. Opening large. I assume I've kind of noticed that I want to be adjusting my RFI size upwards because of the big blind stack size, so maybe I just missed it in the hand against Hecklam. And at equilibrium, sometimes how this works is out of position just has a lot of full pot size bets, and in position then bets small and checks because again, if out of position is probing is leading full pot, then typically his range construction of this SPR is quite merged, and so his checking range becomes polar. But I don't know if that's happening here. And if someone is checking, either just checking everything or not playing the strategy of leading a bunch of merged hands, then I think I just want to go full pot. I have the Ace of Hearts and a 10, so I block some amount of continues, and I'm basically fine getting in at SPR2 anyway. I'm fine checking this hand back, but I will say that at SPR... Well, I've already said that around SPR3 it's kind of advantageous for the in-position players to do quite a lot of small C betting because out of position is so restricted in terms of their room for maneuver. And there is the idea that we can just fold out a lot of accidental equity with King, Queen, Jack 3 kind of stuff, which is useful to us. I wouldn't hate checking this hand back because it has better turn playability than a lot of other 7x combinations, but it also has more equity, so go either way. And it's this is a circumstance where betting third pot at a very high frequency might be kind of a lazy option, but it also gets the vast majority of the EV. I think typically open the better suits. It's kind of nice to have some, strongish Broadway combinations in my limping range. It's kind of nice to keep the pot small against the only player at the table who has a stack that I should be particularly concerned about. I generally want to keep pots small in tournaments against the player to my immediate left because the last thing I want to do is let this guy run his stack up to the point where he might feel he can tangle with me a little bit more. I don't think he's that kind of player, but I am basing that assumption on limited info, so I could easily be wrong. Flop, I think, just pretty easy stab. It's a very good board for me when it goes limp check. He's a lot more capped than I am. The nut flush draw, the backdoor flush draw. This is a very flexible combination, basically, in terms of how the hand can play out when I bet. This is good enough to open, and full pot again would be my preferred sizing. I could also have been trying to create larger pots in position against the big blind. I'm not sure how much experience he has in heads-up situations. So potentially I was looking for some extra EV there. Pretty easy call. I think it's actually pretty good to lead this combination once in a while. The combination of no backdoor flush draw and a front door flush draw blocker, and the hand being a little bit tricky to play against in position c-bet. I don't have to fold or anything, obviously, but I don't really want to check raise this hand. I don't really want to check call, and the turn's a brick, and I just check everything, and he, has the options double barrel and now start putting me in a tough spot. So I think leading is pretty good, actually. Versus under the gun, I like it a little bit more, maybe even, than versus later positions. Because I think, generally speaking, the EV of the check option is going to be a little bit lower. But I was probably, honestly, just checking my entire range. And against this sizing and most others, I just pure call. This is not the best example of what I was talking about, but this turn is a lot better for me if action goes lead call than check bet call. Because now I can build a strategy where I have some small leads, and that might be fun. But I think leading turn is thinner and a little bit more problematic than leading flop. So I would assume I, again, just check range. Seems like a spot where there's a little bit of extra EV on offer if you take kind of non-standard lines. And now I guess I just fold. So we go with min 3-bet, a little bit FPS-y. So I know what the idea is going to be here. The idea is that I achieve some stuff against Kostya. He can't cold call much wider than if I just 3-bet full pot. Not that he's cold calling much against either, because Ruffle Shove is just going to live up to his name and reopen the betting, which is fine by me. If Kostya ends up with a 4-betting hand, I lose less. And it's basically a way, to cheaply get the pot heads up and sometimes lose less in my worst case scenarios, whilst achieving my best case scenario at basically the same frequency. I think I can just 3-bet full pot and be doing fine. I remember, I actually think I probably got this idea from a Run It Once video I made a while ago, which was my review of the 25k World Series final table, PLO final table, where Ben Yu, I think, did it. But that's applying a late stage play where there's huge ICM on everyone and stuff, to an environment where everyone's playing cautiously but maybe broadly close to chip EV. Obvious from now on. No interest in doing anything other than checking and giving up, and that's still the case. It's not the worst hand to bluff now. Imposition is going to have a decent amount of 1-pair stuff, and I have a pretty effective bluff. I unblock the hands I'm targeting, which is kings, queens, jack X. Jack X through, well, he doesn't really have much 2-pair. I guess you can have jack 8, 10, 8. But broadly, I'm targeting his 1-pair stuff. I think betting here might be okay. I like it a lot better if I have an 8. Also, an 8 would be a really nice bluffing card here because literally I've just named his most probable 2-pair to be jack 8, 10, 8. If I had an 8 with a spade, I would imagine I'd be bluffing this spot a whole bunch. I think bluffing here with a low double pair and a spade is probably okay. I could name better bluffs, but that's kind of an irrelevant question. The question is this hand a bluff in and of itself? And I would imagine at least sometimes the answer is going to be yes. That's especially true if I think that Kostya is at equilibrium, imposition is going to call relatively thin and aggressively, and if Kostya's going to fold, a little bit too much, king, jack with a spade kind of thing, or 10-8 even, then I think this hand pretty quickly becomes a pure bluff. But, it's a good job. I think this is pretty underbluffed in general, so likely I dodged a bullet. And since we've run about 3/4 of an hour, I'm going to call it for this installment. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the video. As always, questions, comments, feedback, gratefully received in the thread below or elsewhere. And until next time, this has been Richard Grieco for RunItOnce.com. Take care.